I sat with my back against the wall, sipping an overpriced coffee with a pretentious name and trying not to look around. In my business, you try to pass unnoticed and not spook your prey, as if they'd noticed me anyway. With these two, I had nothing to worry about. They made it so easy for me that I almost felt guilty billing the client for my efforts. After all, it's a nasty job, and they're paying for the outcome, good, bad, or otherwise. I was lucky enough to have an open desk and was able to set up my laptop to record their antics while I typed up my notes. For all they, or anyone else knew, I could have been a contractor or realtor taking a break between meetings, and that's assuming they noticed me at all. I've been doing this for far too long. I'm pushing my business into the corporate market, but there's not as much work there as you might imagine. Scammers remain my daily bread, and there are always enough of them to keep me busy. It's gotten to the point where I can tell how long an affair lasts without having to listen to confessions or bribe a porter. They always begin so cautiously, but with success they become smug, and with smugness they become obvious. Here they are in a public cafe, holding hands and making eyes at each other, thinking they can kiss discreetly, and yet all the people in the store see them and smile. They smile because they think they see a couple in love. I wonder how they would react if they found out that these two lovers are just two cheaters with devoted spouses and children at home, parents who are proud of the way they raised them, and maybe one friend who knows the truth. They separate for a moment and try to take on an innocent look. Jules hands them brownies. She's a good kid. I lower my eyes to the keyboard, not wanting to be seen, and let the camera in my laptop continue recording. I notice Jules cast a glance in my direction and smile, walking back to the counter. Nothing gets past her. I smile wryly and hope the crooks don't notice anything. I wish these two had chosen a different place to meet. I feel almost as conspicuous as they do. Too many people know me in this town. Jules is a prime example of what I mean. One wrong word from her, and I'm screwed. I imagine her waving at me from across the room and yelling, "Hello, Mr. Madison, catch any of the crooks this week?" She wouldn't do that, but I still wish we were somewhere else. The lovers spent the next half hour in quiet flirtation, occasionally kissing and groping each other when they thought no one would notice. If they had any awareness of the other tables around them, they would know that they were far from invisible. The reality of their affair is that they are just playing the odds until the wrong person walks through the door, and sooner or later, they roll the dice and crash. My problem is that I have to be the first to cover them to get the money. When their time is up, they get up and defiantly say goodbye as if they barely know each other. It's so obvious that it elicits laughter. They carry on a meaningless conversation about some imaginary committee report as they walk to the door, then finally leave. I'm taking final notes and preparing to close my laptop when I hear a quiet voice beside me. "Are you working today?" I throw my head up before I realize who it is. They weren't too obvious, were they? It's Jules, and she's trying not to giggle. Jules is Julie Parrish, and she's been dating my son for most of the school year. Tell me, where else is my son going to find a girl who gets good grades, plays on the girls' soccer team, works part-time, and spends her free time helping him with his car when he should be asking her out? I shake my head with a smirk and ask, "How do you know that?" "How do I know what?" "That you're working or that you're watching them?" Gotcha. 17-year-old. Well, both. She looks out the window. Two lovers getting into their cars and preparing to leave. Well, I figured it wasn't college students doing homework or a mom with a baby in a stroller. It could have been the elderly couple in the corner, but they haven't said a word to each other the whole time. She tries hard not to giggle. "So is your client her husband or his wife?" Suddenly she perks up. Oh, it's both of them. They hired you together to get information on the crooks." I try not to laugh, but this girl had me figured out from the first dinner with my family. She circled me, passed every test my wife could think of, and usurped my son's place in the family. In short, she was quickly becoming the daughter we never had. You do know that this information is supposed to be confidential, right? She looked around, shrugged, and replied, "Who am I going to tell?" Her words made sense. It's her husband. Let that serve as a lesson to you, young lady. No one is as smart as they think they are, so don't try to be. Your spouse will learn to read you. He will know your mood, remember what you are wearing, notice which coworkers you talk about, and when you stop talking about them, smell the cologne on your clothes and wonder why you are late, and he will be an ignorant bastard until one day he stops being one. When that day comes, you'll have one foot out the door and won't even notice it. I think I've crossed the line. She has this hurt look on her face. If you think I would ever cheat on my husband, you have a lot to learn about me. Oh, I'm screwed, and my apology flies out of my mouth before she can finish her reprimand. No, I just wanted you to put things into perspective. You know the old saying, honesty is the best policy. I make a pretty good, though sometimes unpleasant, living off of people who never learned it. They think they're too smart to get caught, but it turns out their spouses aren't so clueless. She's still not entirely pleased with me, but pulls out a chair and sits across from me at the table. Speaking of ignorant, what's wrong with your son? I shouldn't smile, but I do. What time do you have? She doesn't smile back, and I realize he's in trouble. It's only 3 weeks until graduation, and he still hasn't asked me. Oh, what's going on? Did he take someone else? I can't help it, but the idea is so absurd I have to laugh. No, he's been talking about prom for weeks now. I know for a fact that he's made reservations at the swank restaurant in town and booked a car to take them. The guy puffed himself up for this one night. She looks genuinely sad. Well, will he ever ask me? Girls like to be asked, you know. I just sat there, not knowing what to say. Junior was in over his head, and any attempt by me to get him out could drag him in even deeper. I'll play dumb and ask him how you reacted when he asked you. From the look in her eyes, she didn't think I'd have to play too hard to get. I'll do it in front of his mother, and when he answers, she can set him straight. That seemed to reassure her. After enough time had passed without either of us uttering a word, she asks, "Don't you need to follow them?" I think, follow who? And then I'm brought back to the present. Oh no, her son is celebrating his 7th birthday today at his grandparents' house, so they're not going anywhere. I didn't tell her that her husband had tagged her car with a GPS tracker, so finding her would be easy. Does she have a kid? Yes, 2. He has 2 too. This is unexpected, and it shows on my face. His son is in our class at school, you know. Don't worry, Mr. M, I won't tell him. He's kind of a jerk anyway. My work became even sadder, and I went back into dad mode. Looking at her, I fumbled for words. You know, Jules, cheating is a character issue. You should think about who's raising this jerk and what lessons he's learning from them. It's entirely possible that he has a lot of blame to bear. I could see that she understood me, and yet you can't tell him. I let her finish, and when she seems to have figured it out, I ask, "So what's the father's name?" Jules smiles. She knows I'm back on track. Baker. Tom Baker. He sells cars at the Ford dealership, I think. I nod, but don't say anything. What happens next? I shrug. I follow them when I know she's leaving the house. After that, it depends on what the client wants. My guess is he'll go for the scorched earth approach and give Mrs. Baker all the evidence I've gathered, hoping she'll hurt Mr. Baker. Sadness appeared in her eyes. Do you think she'll divorce him? I don't know, but most likely, no matter what happens, nothing good will come of it. Her eyes reflected sadness. So 2 families torn apart, 4 kids and single-parent families, all because 2 people never grew up. I take a moment to appreciate this sweet, bright, and poised young woman and thank God that she somehow ended up in my clueless son's life. I guess you'll be hearing from Junior soon. I smile. Not if I hear from him first. And she smiled too. I take a moment to appreciate this sweet, bright, and poised young woman and thank God that she somehow ended up in my clueless son's life. I guess you'll be hearing from Junior soon. I smile. Thank you, Mr. M. With those words, she leaves, picks up the few plates and cups that were never put away, and goes back to work. Before she gets to the end, she stops, turns around, and says quietly, "You know, women like that don't do the rest of us any good." All I can do is shake my head and think, men like that are no better. Everything happened just as I expected, and almost exactly as Jules had predicted. They were careless and easy to catch. I never got pictures of the interiors or motel room records, but they weren't important. Spouses always want it, but you rarely get it. What I did get, though, was lots of kissing in public and pictures of them going into hotel rooms at noon and coming out 90 minutes later. It doesn't take much imagination to figure out what they were doing. 2 weeks later, I handed my client the evidence, and he didn't ask for more. I gave him the usual caution about not doing anything he might regret, and with that, he went to his lawyer. It's times like this that I think there are worse jobs than mine. I get the evidence, and the lawyer wades through the mud and filth to argue the case and get his client the best settlement he can. It worked out just fine for my client. She got custody, and he got what the courts call a liberal visitation agreement. That means every other weekend and some holidays. It's a tough deal for a guy who's done nothing wrong. He's paying for 2 houses or a house and an apartment and living for those 2 weekends a month that he can spend with the kids. The kids didn't understand. Kids that age never do. He needed his pound of flesh, so he shared a file with Mrs. Baker. She was displeased, to say the least, and filed for divorce. 2 families destroyed, 4 children living in separate homes, 1 husband and 1 wife deserving better, but not getting it. I think the worst part was the way his wife tried to make him look like the bad guy in front of friends and family. It didn't work. He had proof and was only too happy to show it to anyone who confronted him. Eventually, their mutual friends told her all too clearly what they thought of her cheating, and life went back to normal. Both he and Mrs. Baker would later build their lives anew and find new love, but it would be many years later. His wife and Mrs. Baker went forward, leaving behind a trail of lies, pain, and broken relationships, first coming together and then splitting up until they found new partners to cheat on. At dinner that night, I casually asked Junior what color dress Jules would wear to the prom. When he replied that he didn't know, my wife took over and asked all the right questions. A few minutes later, he was already on the phone asking Jules to prom, while my wife and I enjoyed dessert. I like this girl, but I'm afraid she's going to have to work hard. That's such a small window into my life. I have a dirty job that causes a lot of unhappiness for a lot of people, and sometimes I wonder if it's all worth it. When it really hits me, I remind myself that I'm just a guy delivering the news. I'm a witness to the betrayal, but not the cause of it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm taking my wife out to dinner and then to the dance. I know she's one of the nicest I've got, and I'm making sure she knows that I know that, well, you know.